Well, I got to tell you, it is an accurate term, but it probably isn't what many readers flash on when I say I'm about to interview two American writers. Because you talked, Azar, about being American by choice. And that's a very profound thing, being American by choice. You knew what you were getting into, kind of. What's happened since you renounced all those foreign princes and potentates?
What happened since I discovered
that you are an American?
That I am an American. You become more concerned about what it means to be an American, and you delve into the life. For me, what surprised me was that in Iran, I had to defend imagination and ideas. In America, I have to defend imagination and ideas. I got involved mainly in the system of education. I think our system of education today is really shameful. I think that in a democratic society, it is the job of the society, of the government, to provide quality public education and quality health for each and every citizen. And the fact that the mentality that is now dominant about, taking no responsibility for the well-being of the citizens of this country, I find it really, really amazingly.
These two books, which I know you're all going to read, are very much concerned with the idea of home and where it is. Where is home now?
Where is home? Well, for me, the safest home is that Republic of Imagination. I mean, I meant it that for me, it's a portable world that I can take everywhere with me. But home is now America. The great thing about America, if you look at it right, is that you can carry your past with you. So, you're Mexican American. I'm Iranian American. I never left Iran. I brought it with me. And I can look at America and change America through this constant discourse between where I came from and where I am now.
Sandra, you live much of the year out of the United States,
yeah,
by choice.
I live in Mexico.
Yeah. So where's home?
My father, it's very curious because my father lived more years in the United States than he did in Mexico, where he was born. He became a citizen by serving in the World War II. The way many immigrants become citizens is by serving, and that's always been true, World War II and now. But I would ask him, don't you want to go home? And he says, home is where my kids are. That was his country. And I don't have kids. So it was, I just felt like my roots were drying up living in a military town, in a military time. And, you came because you wanted to. But even my friends who have been born in Texas 13 generations before the Pilgrims arrived, they were there in the land. We're living in a time when people from south of the border are questioned. You're questioned where you're from or asked to go back where you came from. It's a very hurtful time for people who are Mexican and who are immigrants, and especially dark-skinned people. Especially, I think this is a privilege if you're educated and you're lighter-skinned. But, it's scary to go to a foreign country like Arizona, and, might get deported. I feel, I always felt, and someone asked me, why do Chicano writers always write about identity? I said, that's because we're always asked, where are you from? And you always ask yourself, like, I'm here. I thought I was from here. But the way people react and treat you makes you question, well, am I? Yeah. Am I American? Where am I from? you know, and you start questioning and thinking about that. If you're never questioned, you don't, that's not your theme. But if you're always made to feel like you're a stranger in your own land, that becomes a theme of your writing.
I don't know how many of you know anything about the geography of Chicago, but where Sandra grew up is right where Studs Terkel did the oral histories for Division Street, USA. It's the neighborhood that Saul Bellow wrote about in Humboldt's Gift. It's the neighborhood where Nelson Algren could be seen as one of the denizens of the street. Studs Terkel was a New Yorker. Saul Bellow was a Canadian. Even Carl Sandburg, who wrote about the stacker of wheat. And,
He's in Minnesota.
He didn't come from Chicago. You were born right there.
That's not true. He
You came from Galena.
He came from
Galesburg, right.
State.
Galesburg, right on
His family.
on the Mississippi River. But you wanted to just get the hell out of there. All these writers are going to the place where you're growing up, and you have this very ambivalent relationship with that place.
Well, you know, when you come from the crummy neighborhoods, you don't want to stay there, and that's all you know, it doesn't allow you to dream. I remember once being a kid and standing on Chicago and Ashland. You know, we always used to go to Goldblatt's and all the stores there to shop, and one day I was waiting on the bus to get to the Milwaukee and get to North Avenue, and I'm standing in front of the drugstore, and it was one of those drugstores with the corrugated cardboard, like, you know, like a school project, and on top of the corrugated colored cardboard were like nail clippers and X-Lax and combs to get rid of lice and things like that. I looked at him and I said, I got to get out of here. And there was just nothing beautiful in my neighborhood. All the beauty went, you know, to the places that tourists saw, and it cost a lot of energy and money. Fortunately, my mother was driven crazy too, and she said, I got to get out of here. Let's go downtown. And so at least we get a little dose of culture and beauty on Sundays and, you know, Saturdays.
Azar, you spoke of imaginary America versus actual America. And that was fun for me to read because growing up just across the river, in many ways it was a culturally self-sufficient universe. I didn't need to go to Norman, Oklahoma, where you went to college. I really didn't feel like I was missing anything. But you knew more about the actual America than I did. Even though
What is actual America? I mean, that is one sort of puzzling question.
Well, let me give you a hint. People in Norman don't think it's Brooklyn.
But shall I say something about New York? Will I?
Please do. They can take it.
Will you take it? I was in Kansas City, and they were showing me the library and the museum, wonderful, amazing things. And the guy turns to me and he says, New Yorkers are so provincial. They come to Kansas City and they say, oh, you've got museums. No, I mean, I'm not saying that, but this country is so big and various. It's so big and various that sometimes going from one state to another is like traveling to another country, you know, and that is both amazing and it's disconcerting at the same time.
But you had a notion of America before you got here.
Yeah.
How did the country match the America that was in your head when you were flying across the Atlantic Ocean?
Well, you know, the point about these stories is that they both reveal I mean, you know, at the same time that Huck Finn, for example, is such a violent book, and it shows all the violent aspects of this country through conformity. I mean, from Sunday school little ladies, you know, who sell people's children down the river, to drunks who just use the gun and kill one another. Every form of violence imaginable happens in Huckleberry Finn. And it is that idea of conformity and complacency. But right side by side with it, it is Huck and Jim. And it is the fact that in America, at least the dream, and some of us who believe in the dream should work with it, you know, should dare to believe it. the heroes are not those Sunday school people. They're not Mr. Trump or whoever else that we want to think about. That in fact, those whom we call failures are the ones who have the courage to fail, the courage to remain marginal, are the ones who are at the center. You know, are the ones who are at the center of American fiction. I mentioned in my book, Mark Twain, there was a speech he gave on the anniversary of Mayflower to the Philadelphia Society, all these gentlemen, and very much tongue-in-cheek, what he tells them, he says that you deprived me of my ancestors. And he begins with the first Native American. And he says, you deprived me of him, and then he goes through the Quakers, the burning witches in Salem, and at the end he comes to the slaves. And he says, all of these people were my ancestors, and you took them away from me. And then he says, for I am a many-shaded, exquisite mongrel. You know, and that is how my imaginary America is, you know, and that is how when the civil rights movement happens in this country, when women's rights movement happens in this country, I see signs of that many-shaded, exquisite mongrel, and I want to belong to that crowd.
But Sandra, hasn't the embrace of that always been kind of half-hearted? You wouldn't have been asked where you're from all the time if Americans were perfectly at peace with being many-shaded mongrels.
No, they're not at peace. If they were, we wouldn't have conflict.
I mean, you take us to steamy kitchens and creaky floors and the lives of just regular old people, and for many of your readers, the only way they know about those places is because you took them there.
I think that for many of my readers, it's the first time that they've seen themselves portrayed accurately and with love in American letters. It's the first time that they've seen a house that they've recognized as their house. I know when I wrote House, I felt that I'd never seen my life or my neighborhood or people I loved portrayed in a loving way. And I remember feeling so ashamed when, you know, my Proustian cookie was the house, and being in a seminar in Iowa and realizing, oh, everybody in this room has a house except me. Because everybody talked except me, and I was trying to survive. And I realized, oh my God, have we ever examined my house or in a loving way, in an accurate way? And my first reaction was, oh, I don't belong here, I'm going to quit. So I was going to quit the program. And fortunately, the other side for me of depression is rage. And rage, then I started asking, well, why have I never seen my neighborhood and my community portrayed with love and portrayed honestly? And I set forth to write that book. I was in the poetry workshop, so I wrote poems about that neighborhood, and I wrote a fiction book on the side as a kind of personal life jacket to keep me from drowning in sorrow from being at the Iowa Writers' Workshop.
But you also wrote a lot of that book outside the country, didn't you?
I'm so, well, it
Further
actually,
playing with that idea of
no.
home and borders.
Oh, I finished, you know, I had this idea of a memoir when I began it because I was so ashamed of my house, and I didn't know I was ashamed. It was like I was always walking around with this clubfoot that was the class and color and gender difference, and I didn't name it until we talked about houses in that seminar. And then I went from Friday, moving all of my possessions in my father's van from the upholstery shop. He always would send two brothers or one brother, go get your sister. Oh, you know, do I have to? It's a pleasure. And they would have to go get me. So one of the brothers came to get all my possessions, put me in a van, and take me out of Iowa. And on Monday, I started working minimum wage, part-time at a alternative high school in the community. And I was so astonished by my students and their lives And this was the kind of school where I had to bring chalk in my pocket, and then after I finished using it, I had to put it back in my pocket so it wouldn't disappear. And I just thought, what am I doing? I need to write about their lives. They have lived harder and more difficult lives than mine. So my book changed from a memoir to a novel when I started putting my students and their problems and their issues and their stories that reminded me of my mother's story, that reminded me of my neighbors from my past. I just wove them all together, and I didn't finish the book until I won an NEA. I was 28. I won an NEA, and I could stop and quit my job and finish the book, and that's why I finished it in Greece.
That puts her right in the great American tradition. I mean, you give voice to something that had not existed before.
Yeah, but I had to get mad as hell.
Yeah, you have to get, you know, I mean, that is the point. You have to suffer and you have to get mad at hell.
Well, first you have to realize something's missing.
Yeah, and then, I mean, that is how it is born. That is how it comes into being, you know, that you have this urge to explain and express and understand and articulate a reality that exists, but until people see it, it seems as if it doesn't exist, you know.
Well, both of you write a lot and talk a lot about teaching and what you get back from your students and what you learn from them about texts you already know like the back of your hand. It's very different teaching Lolita in Tehran versus bringing kids in the Near West Side to the page. But it also, in both worlds, speaks to a very 21st century notion that it's kind of a luxury to study literature. You've really, you know, we got to teach STEM, and you've got to master your geometry and your algebra, and, well, literature, if there's time left over. Maybe we'll even throw in a music lesson. Is it tough to look down the road and see where we're going? I mean, you still have years left to work and years left to preach the gospel and talk about the power of the word. But right now, there are a lot of schools where you'd get pushed back from the principal if you wanted to teach a literature class.
I remember when out-of-work poets could get jobs teaching poetry in the schools and teaching children to love poetry instead of being afraid of poetry, because a lot of the English teachers didn't know how to teach poetry. And I also, would someone explain to me why I needed algebra? I've never used it since I left, you know. I don't understand, but, you know, but I do know we need the arts, because arts is what is the medicine to transform our demons into light. I really believe that, because my demons have often almost done me in, almost taken me to the edge where I couldn't destroy others around me, but I could destroy myself, and I came very close. So that was when I stopped writing in my 33rd year. But I think, what about these young people that are, you know, shooting each other or, you know, resorting to violence, and they have no language to understand the things their heart is telling them. To me, that's why we need art. It's not entertainment or a hobby. It's medicine to transform your demons into light.
You know, it is interesting who is saying art is luxury. You hear it among people who live in luxury, or people who are denied even the basic necessities of life. I mean, I always ask people, who is filling these museums? In Washington, D.C., I mean, Smithsonian is the jewel in the eye of this country, and they are free. I go there to write, and, you know, it is filled with quote-unquote ordinary people. Who goes to Shakespeare in the Park? Who used to read in 19th century Charles Dickens? Was it the aristocrats? Was it, does Mr. Trump know the address of the museum? You know, it is one of the most condescending attitude by people who are so bloody ignorant, you know. I mean, these people know nothing about these books, nothing. Who goes? I just was at the National Book Festival in Washington, D.C. 110,000 people come to the National Book Festival. You do not see one member of Congress there, you know. You do not see one wealthy person there. So when we're talking about luxury, we're talking about luxury for whom? This is supposed to be a democratic country where what the founders supposedly wanted was that what the aristocrats had, now the people would have. So not just the parks where we can walk in, but the museums, the libraries, what belonged to a few should belong to the rest of us. And they are acting as if they're doing us a favor by supporting a few museums, you know, or giving us education. Private schools are getting art and music and literature. Where are we not getting that? In public schools.
Azar, I want to add, I recently was sat next to the left side of the mayor of Chicago, and I learned that mayors don't know how to listen. They only know how to tell stories, you know.
Yeah.
I tried, and
Their
I wanted...
staff listen for
Well, that mayor
Right.
doesn't know how to
You're
listen.
right.
That's a whole different thing.
I sat next to him and I told him, I said, you know, the reason why I'm a writer is because on Sundays, museums used to be free for working class people. They work on Thursdays and on other days that they have a free day, you know, and it's hard, especially in Chicago where you can't afford to live in the city center and you live way out on the burbs. And, you know, I told him if I wouldn't be here today if it hadn't been for the Chicago Public Library and the free concerts in the park, and museums at that time were free on Sunday, because one of the things is it's hard if you have to pay admission for 9 people to go to the movies or to, you know, we used to go to the drive-in and some of us used to have to pretend to be sleeping so we could get through, you know. And, you know, but it's true. And, you know, so you're not going to go to institutions where you have to pay. And even if they say suggested price, let me tell you, poor people are the ones that are going to pay that suggested price rather than be shamed to pay less.
That is exactly
And they can't afford to pay that
exactly
suggested price.
And it
So
is
I just want to say that to the
all
mayor of
over.
Chicago and all the mayors that are maybe in the room. Any mayors in the room? I thought so.
So do we bring up the house lights? We have time for a couple of questions from the audience. And is there a person who will bring you a mic, or am I going to have you speak in a big loud voice and restate your question? Go ahead.
I'm a high school English teacher. I'm also an immigrant. English is not my first language. I love reading and writing in English. None of my colleagues learn English as a second language. Half of my students learn English as a second language. As not monolingual writers, how do you think about writing in English and thinking through your voice? Because I don't know about you, but in my head, there's more than one language. But when I have to speak to people who do not happen to share my languages, I have to filter and turn it into English. Can you tell me how that works for you so that when I go to my students, I know how to talk to them?
How do you want to say something?
Do I have to pick somebody? Will somebody go to just answer?
I love to hear her voice. Okay. You know, for me, actually, I guess I'm the kind of person that always being somewhere else helps me open up, you know, and words. So for me, writing both in Persian and English has been sort of a blessing, because you constantly bring in the images and the nuances of that other language into this one. And I love doing that. I love the way my Iran sort of sneaks into my English and creates an image that then genuinely becomes mine, you know. And I keep telling my children, I say that, you know, all my life I have been complaining about the fact that I never had a home. In Iran, I didn't even want to put up curtains because I didn't know how long I would stay. And in America, I still have boxes in my living room, But the point about it is that looking at the world through all these different eyes is fantastic. And language is the best way of finding all these different homes. So they could look at it as being lucky.
Sandra?
I was not aware that Spanish had anything to do with my first book until I wrote someone a letter who didn't speak English, and I was forced to write in Spanish. And I remember stopping mid-letter and thinking, oh, this sounds like my first book, like House on Mango Street voice. Then I realized that even though there wasn't a syllable of Spanish in the chapters, I may be wrong, but I don't think there's a syllable. The syntax of the Spanish, Mexican Spanish, is in every sentence. The flavor, in fact, my personal editor then was a best friend, Dennis Mathis. He put a ban on me using the word little, because I used it so much, it was just like too much salt on all my sentences. And I had to explain, I'm not using the word little, I'm using the diminutive in my head of Spanish, chiquitito or Miguelito, So I was trying to get a tenderness there without being aware. Now I realize that underneath the English is a Mexican Spanish. It's kind of like an excavating the churches in Mexico City, and you see that the stones were made out of pyramids, and underneath the pyramids, another pyramid. Well, underneath the English is the Spanish. Underneath the Spanish is an indigenous syntax that is particular to Mexican Spanish. And that's why they use the ito and the little diminutive, because the indigenous languages, even though most of them have been, they've committed genocide and made them disappear, but some traces of the animistic way of looking at the universe and some traces of the tenderness has appeared to pepper Mexican Spanish with a diminutive. It makes it very distinct from other Spanish spoken in the Americas. So I think even if you didn't try, because it's already in you, because you know there are two languages that don't match perfectly, it's those interstices where they don't match, which is that rich, loamy soil to write from. It's so interesting, and the more languages you have, it's like each language gives you a mirror to hold up. And if you don't use it, then you're depriving us of seeing ourselves and how we differ from you.
I do this a lot. I rarely get questions as good as that. So who's going to try to reach that bar next? Right? Yes, in the back.
Yeah, you.
So you guys have you guys are both women and authors, and you guys have been living in different places a lot. So you guys have, are there any like gender roles that people have given you because like of religion and culture and like where you come from, your household? Like, are there any gender roles that anybody has said that you have to be some type of way?
This time.
Well, to me, what I like to do for myself, to get myself writing, I write about the things I'm not supposed to do, like as a daughter or as Mexican American, things that make me different from other writers. I try to go to those places where they say, don't do that, and then I do it. So, take all the things that, make a list for yourself of as gender. What are the things that other women don't write about? Even your favorite women writers, what could you write about as a woman that they haven't written about? What about other women of your ethnicity? What do you know that no one has written yet? What do you know in your family that no one else knows? And most important, what things do you wish you could forget right from that place?
Azar, is that a question you'd answer differently before and after the revolution?
About gender? Well, yes, but it came naturally. It wasn't that I wanted to write about it. As you know, writing is like falling in love. You always think that you fall in love with the guy who has, I don't know, brown hair, brown eyes, very tall. You see someone, blue eyes, blonde hair, very short, and you don't know why you fall in love with him, and then you take it from there and you start developing it. So for me, I was obsessed. And the Islamic Republic had made me to become obsessed with the meaning of what it means to be a woman and a teacher and a writer under these circumstances. So I had to investigate it, you know.
I have to say that I love so much, you know, when we talk about the things we don't, when we write about the things we don't talk about, it takes us to our strongest writing. And I love so much the title of your book, your memoir. And
Things I've been silent about.
yes, because I said, that's it. You have to write about the things that you can't even mention to yourself, that you push down and you wish you could forget it. Because the more you try to forget it, the more it floats up. And it's only until you face it and write it that it takes you through that darkness to light. No?
That is fantastic. And while you were reading there, I kept thinking, oh my God, we are talking about a lot of
Yes, and it reminded me a lot of one of my favorite books by June Jordan, her poetry book, Things That I Do in the Dark. What a great title, huh?
I just wanted to say something to you about Iran, the Persian language you were talking about. For example, in Persian, when we want to say I miss you, we don't say we missed you. We say your place was empty. And I love that. And I keep thinking of somewhere in a book where I can have a character tell someone your place was empty, you know. So I think that people can do that, you know.
We have time for one more, and that would be you.
And they're
Sorry. Well, if he makes it quick, I might get to it. Right?
So my question is related to culture, the ambiguity of culture. And so I'm curious, so how do you define, what is your definition of culture in this 21st technological globalized era that we are in?
I mean,
A good, quick, brief question to answer before we wrap up.
I give up.
You know, one of the things my great mentor taught me when you get a question like that, and she taught me the answer, I haven't a clue. Elena Poniatowska.
So there is time for one more. Yes.
Sorry, this may not be short, and I apologize, but
Well, at least you're upfront about it.
you guys keep talking about writing from this place, especially of things that you want to forget. But where do you find that courage to share your rage, to share those things that you want to forget, and find that courage to be creative and upfront about it?
You're right from such a courageous place, Azar. You want to answer that first?
You answer that first.
No, por favor. But
About the courage,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
She really did a
follow.
good job. I mean,
I'm Mexican. You have to go first.
I'll only go first because I'm older than you are. God damn it.
All right, I'll give you time. All right, I give you time.
The courage to write. Well, what we were talking about this with the students about the courage to write, and actually the courage to read, because when you write, you have to be naked, and all the warts and all, and not only see yourself naked, but allow the world to see you naked, you know. And that takes a different kind of courage than the physical kind of courage. And I've noticed it in different ways. Like, for example, people who are very ideological and they stick to one set of ideologies, they never want to see the world or themselves in any other light, you know. And I mean, you listen to Fox News or you listen to MSNBC, they each have their plans about who they are and what the world is, and they're not going to budge. But when you are a writer, you don't have that luxury. You have to lay bare. And laying bare and telling the truth is very difficult. It is like falling in love. You don't know what you expect, how it's going to end. You cannot write the scenario for a happy ending in terms of what happens to you as a writer. You just go with it and jump down that bloody hole.
You know, to answer your question, one of the great writers who I admired so much is Emily Dickinson, and she wrote 1,770, let's say 72, I don't know how many poems in her lifetime, but she only published a few, and it was against her will. She threw them under the bed, and she bound them in beautiful paper and sewed them together and hid them and didn't publish them in her lifetime, and I totally get it, because writing and publishing are opposite things. So you must write, especially now in these times when we're censored to even think outside the box. You must have one room in your imagination, in that house of the imagination, where you could say anything. And to give yourself permission, you must imagine that what you have to say cannot be published in your lifetime. Imagine and give yourself that luxury. You may write it and eat it.
Yeah.
You may tear it up and take it to the river and let the river take it to the sea. You may burn it and send it to the gods, but you must write as if it was your last day on the planet, and it is your truth. You do not have to show it to anyone. It's more important that you write it than if you share it. Believe me. Then if you're a professional, you will timidly start sharing it with your colleagues. And then from your colleagues, like that, like a little ring, it grows and you get more courageous and shameless. But you must always write as if your life depended on it.
Yes, yes, that is great.